All right, everybody. Welcome again to the Livecast. I congratulate those of you that are up at 10 a.m. after returns come in last night. Don't know if all of you did that. If you guys can make sure you're muted that are monitoring, please. Cool. So welcome everybody who's here from Facebook, from LinkedIn, and from YouTube. I want to talk today about a sort of a follow-up to a discussion we had a few weeks ago. You may remember we did a Livecast on the topic of why is it that a lot of companies don't invest in customer research? Those of you who know me or have been following me know that my new book, now Wall Street Journal bestselling book, Winning Digital Customers, is heavily about how the success today is about winning the love of your customers. And that often means creating a great digital experience. And that a key component of that is doing the right kind of research to make sure you really understand your customers' needs. And in the book, I go into great depth about a variety of different creative practices and tips and techniques on how to relatively rapidly get good insight into your customers, what their needs are, what their points of pain.
Howard, sorry, your sound keeps cutting out. I can't hear you.
I'll just switch to the regular thing.
Now you're muted. It says your mic is not connected. So you might need to switch which mic.
Can you hear me now, okay?
Yes, you're good.
Oh, hello.
You're good.
Can you hear me? But I can't hear you, but that's okay. Okay, all right. Thank you. Apologize to anybody who had to, was waiting for the actual session while we're dealing with whatever technical problem we just had. Crazy problem we had yesterday. Everyone was hearing echoes, and we still can't figure out where that was coming from. Sounds like it was a LinkedIn problem. Okay, so let me just begin again in case some of you had trouble hearing what I was saying, or at least the key part of it, which is, as I mentioned, I talk very much in my book and in my work about the importance of customer research. And we did a session a couple weeks ago about the topic of why is it so many companies, large companies launching major new products and services often give short shrift to customer research, don't do much customer research. And so we talked about some of the reasons, because I do think that is a pattern. Some do, no question, some do. But a surprising number don't when it's such a proven tool to so substantially reduce the risk of launching something that will be unsuccessful in the marketplace. And so I did a whole Livecast on all the different reasons. I think there's a number of reasons. I can't remember how many reasons. I think we get 6 or 8 different reasons that may be applicable in your situation, why companies are just underinvesting or not focusing on doing customer research. But today I want to answer a variation on that question, because some people responded after that Livecast and said, well, because that Livecast was a result of some people who'd asked the question, my company doesn't do enough customer research. Why do you think so many companies don't take it seriously? So that was what I was trying to answer in that Livecast. But some of the feedback I got was people saying, my company actually does do a fair amount of customer research. We have a whole research division, that sort of thing. And I really don't think we're getting much traction from it. I don't really think it's helping us. So that's a different problem, right? The first problem is if your company's not doing any meaningful customer research or enough customer research. But some people were saying, well, actually, I don't think that's my problem. It might be someone else's problem. But my problem is my company's doing it, but it just doesn't seem to be having the impact that seemingly it should, because we're still not producing products that are really aligned with users' needs. So how is it we're doing the research and we're not getting the results? So, and I was actually, I want to give a little shout out for my podcast, actually, because I did a great, we launched our podcast a few weeks ago, and you might wonder, well, what's the difference between Howard's Livecast and Howard's podcast? That's a lot of casts. Well, mostly in my podcast, I've been interviewing digital leaders. So the first podcast was with Michelle McKenna, the Chief Information Officer of the National Football League. Amazing woman. She had some really inspiring things to say. And I just recorded one. We've done a few others, but I just recorded one with Lou, my good friend, who's just retired actually from spending a number of years as the CEO of Foot Locker internationally. So we had a great conversation about how his Foot Locker responded to COVID and digital transformation of Foot Locker and other things. But one of the topics we talked about there was customer research. And he also talked about this issue of the challenge of doing customer research and finding that not everybody was always following it. So I thought to myself, yeah, I've seen that pattern as well. Again, a different pattern than the one I talked about last time. So I thought I'd just share some thoughts about why. Oh, and if you want to get to the podcast, by the way, you can go here, WDC Podcast.Captivate.fm. It's available. We're using a distribution platform. So wherever you get podcasts, it's almost certainly available. It's called Winning Digital Customers Podcast. Try to be consistent across platforms, but it's certainly on Apple and Spotify. I use Spotify. I don't even know what all the other platforms are, but wherever you go, odds are very, very good it's there. If not, let us know, but it's most likely findable wherever you get your podcast from. So in any case, so let's just talk for a minute about, or a couple minutes actually, about my little list here. I'm going to pull it up. And these are the 8 reasons in my experience, and I mean, I'm not saying they're the only 8 reasons, but these are the big 8 reasons why I think you might find situations where companies say, actually, we do a lot of customer research here, and yet we don't see the result. And I want to talk a little bit about what to do about it, right? And that's what we did in the last one too. The last one on this topic was why companies are underinvesting and what to do about it. And this is why is it that some companies that are investing are just not getting the impact. The first is that they just don't share it. I'm amazed how often I will be working with a client and I'll ask what kind of research has been done, and they'll say, yeah, I don't know. We've got some sort of research team. Why don't you go talk to them? And I'll go talk to them, and they'll have like binders full of really interesting stuff that nobody's really paying a lot of attention to. In fact, I feel bad very often research teams at companies feel unappreciated and disregarded because they're out there doing all this research and they feel it as much as anybody. Why is this research not getting used more? So that's the first thing, is to make sure that if you are someone leading some sort of digital project or product development effort, really make sure that you've reached out and you've scoured your organization for the research that's been done, the customer research that's been done, because it may not be being shared effectively just through lack of sufficient communications. And make sure you've reached out and really done your best to avail yourself of that research that's already been done, because of course it was done, no doubt, to provide the company better insight into how to more effectively deal with their customers. Because as we say all the time here, business success is primarily driven by your ability to successfully drive customer behavior. Most business levers are all about customer behavior, whether it's purchase or repurchase or upsell or how long they stay a customer, loyalty, churn. You can go on and on, all the different customer behaviors that really are the core of what drives success for our business. So understanding the customer whose behavior you want to be able to drive is key, right? If you want to understand how to influence somebody, understand what's already influencing them and what's important to them. So if you're a user, a consumer, potential consumer of research, I think that's the first tip. But if you're a creator of research within your company, you work on a research team, or maybe you just work on a product team, but you're out doing customer research, I want to just advocate for you to try to figure out how to share it, or I'll even say market it as much as you can. Figure out who else might benefit from this research and really proactively try to put it in their hands and make sure they have the opportunity to leverage it. We do this all the time. We'll get hired by a division of a company to work on research for a project, right? Like let's say it's a new bill payment feature for the private personal banking website, just a regular consumer banking website. And we'll go out and do a bunch of research about it, including customer research, and we'll come up with all these findings that relate to this project. But we'll also have the notion that, wow, we've just learned a lot of things that don't only apply to this project. They may apply to other aspects of individual banking other than bill payment. They may apply to some aspects of small business banking or private wealth banking or other parts of the organization. So we're always asking the question when we do research, hey, what else can we do to make sure that you're getting this research in the hands of everybody who could benefit from it? Because you want to make sure that investment in research is paying off as many times over as possible. Even if the only reason you invested was for one project, which very well may have paid for itself just within that one project. Now that you've got the asset, you really want to leverage it as many places as possible. So that's the first problem that I see. People just don't share the research, and that would seem like an easy one to solve, right? Although easy to say, but in organizations with silos, sometimes it's easier said than done. The second reason that I think some companies do a lot of customer research and it just doesn't pay off is that they don't connect the research to business priorities. So I've had occasion to talk to business units and say, well, let's say they're struggling with a question, like how can we get our mobile app to be more widely adopted by our customers? And I'll ask about research, and they'll say, oh, we have a research team, but who knows what they're doing? I think they just study advertising or something like that. And I'll say, well, have you told them that this issue is something that you're struggling with, and you'd love it if there was research that they have that would help support your decision-making process? Sometimes they say yes and they're not interested. Very often it's like it hasn't even occurred to them. And so I want to say it now so that it occurs to you, right? You want to make sure, again, there's two sides, right? If you're on the research team or you're just a consumer of information, but what you really want is you want the people who are out there doing research to be doing it aligned with the business priorities. Now, on one hand, this might seem so obvious that you might wonder why I'm mentioning it, except for someone like me who's in the trenches with a lot of companies, I can tell you that very often there are research teams that are deciding what to focus on. Well, this month or this quarter, we're going to focus on this trend or that trend. And they have kind of their own vision for how they want to develop more insight about the customer. And by the way, there might be some great ideas there, because sometimes a research team will have thought about something to research that the business isn't even thinking about. Like, let's say it's a trend, right? Let's say there's a new trend in the marketplace and they have a notion this is part of what you want your research team to be thinking about. And so they say, well, we should research this because it might be applicable to our company, even though nobody's asking about it. That's great. That's great to have a research team thinking about things like that. So I don't want to suggest to you that every single research effort should be linked only to a question that comes from the business units. But there, if you are having the problem of the research not being utilized, go back and try to understand what are the key needs of information that the business units have. And here's how I always think about it. Research exists for only one purpose, which is to answer questions. That's why we do research. We have a question, we don't know the answer, we do research, right? How many customers buy from us? Why do customers buy from us? What would make them tell their friends more often? How do I get more people who bank, in person to do it online? Whatever your questions are, that's the core of research. If you have no questions, there's no need to do any research. So then in business, you want to ask yourself, well, what are the most important questions? The most important questions in business are those that are being used to drive decisions. And of the variety of decisions that are being driven, the most important questions are those that are critical to the most important decisions, the decisions that are either going to cost the most money, that have the most risk associated with them, or have the most potential to have a big business impact. And in any given business unit, if you go to the leader of that business unit and say, what are the most important decisions your business unit has to make this quarter, this year, inevitably somebody who's running a business unit will know the answer to that question. If you ask them, what research can we do to help you? They may not have a thought about that. I don't know. But if you say, well, what are you trying to decide? They may say, oh, well, we're trying to decide whether we should expand in China or Korea or forget Southeast Asia altogether. Or we're trying to decide whether we should expand the number of SKUs or reduce the number of SKUs. Or we're trying to decide whether we need to do a overhaul of our website or whether it's good enough and it's really not going to be worth the effort or whatever. These are the things they're trying to decide. And then what you want to ask yourself is, well, okay, how does that connect to customer behavior? Because very often it does. The decision about whether you're going to add or reduce more SKUs, well, what are the factors that are going to weigh into that? Now, some of it may not have to do with customers. Some of it may have to do with costs or other things. But some of it may have to do with the fact that, okay, we have 5,000 SKUs. If we reduce it down to 2,000 SKUs, would that change our total sales? If instead of offering our product in 9 colors, we only offered it in 4 colors, would all the same customers buy the product and they just pick one of the 4 colors? Or would we lose a whole bunch of sales because without having it in teal, someone won't buy our product and they'll go find a competitor's product that's in teal, right? That's a key question that you're trying to figure out. Well, that's a customer behavior question. So if you can just go through those couple of steps to understand what are the most important business decisions that need to be made and how do then they relate to customer behavior, and what is it we don't know about customer behavior that or customer thoughts or feelings or mindsets, if we knew it would help us make a better decision. Now, these are the things that are valuable to business decision making. And whether that's at a granular level, like, what color to make the button on a website, or at a vast strategic level, like whether to expand into China. And so making sure that you have that connection between people doing the research and the people who are driving business decisions, so that when the research comes out, they don't look at it and say, well, that's not information I need. Instead, they go, oh, you have the answers to the questions that we're trying to figure out right now. And then all of a sudden you have very interested people who are going to hopefully consume that research, and it'll really get traction. And that's what we're after here, because what we're talking about is, why is it that customer research sometimes doesn't seem to have an impact? And if it doesn't answer the questions that are driving most important decisions, well, that's why it doesn't have an impact. Or at least that's one reason. Third reason, people just don't like it. They don't like it. They're excited about launching a new product, and you have customer research that shows that people don't seem enthusiastic about the product. And they hear that research and they say, yeah, thanks, but don't circulate that around, right? Nobody needs to see that. That'll demoralize everybody. Just keep that to yourself. We don't need that kind of information. Now, there may be occasions where you're so far along in a project that research is too late, and it's like you've invested so much, you might as well launch it. But there's also a human tendency to fall in love with our own ideas. We all have it. We have an idea. We have a project. We're working on it. We're enthusiastic about it. We've invested our passion and our time and our money. If you have a budget at a business unit, and then some evidence comes along that suggests that maybe you're going in the wrong direction. And it's a natural human psychological reaction to first say, I want to deny that. And that was actually a little bit, somewhat, the story that we heard in the podcast that I mentioned earlier. And well, you do that at your peril, right? Because if success is rarely about launching a product. Most products fail. Success is about, almost always, driving customer behavior. So if you have evidence, if I'm driving along trying to get from, Miami to Detroit, and there's some road signs that are actually suggesting that maybe I'm headed in the opposite direction, it would be a drag to have to. Don't you hate that when you realize you've been driving 20 minutes in the wrong direction, and then you got to turn around, and then you got to drive 20 minutes back in the other direction just to get where you started? Ugh, I hate that. And then it's even worse if there's traffic back in the wrong direction, in the other direction. You're like, this is traffic I wouldn't have even been in. That's the worst. And because that's such a bad feeling, it's natural to want to deny it and to want to not turn around. But let's be honest. If your goal is to get from, what did I say, Detroit to Miami, I can't even remember, and it turns out the road signs are telling you you're actually headed towards Cleveland, you need to take some action, right? It's not going to work out for you in the long run. What's more important, the momentary annoyance or actually achieving your goal? And so, it's important to cultivate a culture that is enthusiastic about research, is looking for it, and respects it. Doesn't mean that every piece of research is right, by the way. If a piece of research comes in that suggests you might be going in the wrong direction, it's a major turnaround, you may want to find some other ways to validate that research. I'm not saying you have to believe everything you're told just because it's somebody who has the word research in their job title. But to just disregard it because it's not information you want to hear, probably not a good business choice. Okay, number 4. It's sort of similar. They cherry pick, exaggerate, or overgeneralize. Sometimes there's an outcome we want. We want to launch a new product, we test it with users, and we want to conclude that it's going to be successful because nobody wants their product to fail. But it's better to fail earlier than to fail later, right? Better to go spend 3 months developing a prototype only to discover that it's failure than to spend the next 9 months bringing it to market and spending many times more dollars only to discover it's a failure that you could have discovered 3 months in, right? So you got to sort of be willing to take your medicine early. Or don't do that. Just use the information to pivot, to change what you're doing so that it can be successful. So that's sort of similar, right, to what I said before about disregard. But the difference is, instead of disregarding it, some people cherry pick it. They say, well, there's always ways of taking information and trying to look on the bright side. Or say, well, women love the product. That's great, but men absolutely hate it. And, if only women like your product, then that's not going to be enough sales for the product to be successful, or requires rethinking the way you market it or something. Then, don't just focus on the fact that women love the product, right? Don't just cherry pick that. And don't overgeneralize. If you've only talked to people in Chicago or something like that, and this kind of touches on one of my other topics as well, but overgeneralizing is a risk as well. There's one feature that people really loved, and so you generalize that they love the whole product. Well, is that really what you learned? Or did they just learn that they love that one feature? You just want to be disciplined about, what did you really learn? And if you don't know about certain other things, better to acknowledge that, yeah, we don't know there. And if it's important, like, we don't know if they like the other features. We really just know that they like this feature. And if it's important to know about the other features, then maybe you need to do some more research to look into that, instead of just kind of assuming that if they like the one feature, they like everything. So these are some of the problems, right? People take the data, but they twist it and they shape it in a way that meets their own needs, but which actually is taking you farther away from genuine insight into the customer. And the next couple are sort of along the same lines in a certain sense. One is they over quantify with insufficient sample size. We did interviews with 6 customers, and half of them said they would buy the product. So therefore, we're concluding that, half of all people in America will buy the product. Well, that is not an appropriate quantification. That is not appropriate, numerical estimation from only 6 people. Now, if you talk to 6,000 people and half of them wanted to buy the product, then you'd be in a lot better position to say, maybe that is can be extrapolated to the general public. Now, of course, you generally don't want to talk to 6,000 people because that becomes impractical. So one of the things that we talk about in the book, for example, is how you might sometimes want to start with things like interviews to get qualitative insight, and then switch to tools like surveys, where you know what to ask. And now you can ask a larger group of people, something that you learned as an insight from a smaller group, but then see, maybe 6 out of 12 people said something. But when you do a survey of 1,000 people, it turns out that only, 300 of 1,000 people said it, or maybe 900 of 1,000 people said it, or maybe only men or women, or only people in the Midwest, or only people that are of a certain age, or only people that are serving in the military, or, right? It could be a wide range of different things. And when you have a larger sample size, you can start to slice and dice like that, versus when you only have a small sample size. So you just don't want to over quantify and over conclude things from a small sample. And a similar one is not talking to enough types of customers. I kind of alluded to that in my comment already. We only talk to the customers. We only talk to our best customers. We showed a product to our 5 best customers and they loved it. Well, listen, if only your best customers buy the product, your biggest customers buy it, and that'll be enough to make success, well, then maybe that's fine. But if you're using them as a proxy for, you need to sell it to a whole bunch of companies that aren't even your customers right now, that's not enough. You haven't got it. Nothing wrong with asking your best customers, but you also better ask some of your run-of-the-mill customers, maybe some of your dissatisfied customers, and maybe some of your non-customers, right? Make sure that you've really surveyed a broad enough range of the people who you intend to sell the product to. You don't have to go ask, a completely unrelated product segment if that's not who you're counting on to buy your product. But if you look at are creating this, whatever it is, right? And obviously what I'm talking about can apply to a lot of things, whether it's a TV show or an ad or an app or a toaster. But no doubt you've created it for a certain kind of customer that you believe will want this. So make sure within that kind of customer that you're asking yourself, well, what's the diversity? In the book, we talk a lot about segmentation and how to do that. I'm not going to get into it now, but just the big picture idea is, don't only talk to people that are in your local market. Don't only talk to your friends and family. Don't only talk to people who are like you. Make sure you've got, plenty. There's a great story in the book that I won't try to get into now, but there's a couple great stories in the book actually about cases where we just heard things from people that just make us fall over because they're just thinking so differently than we are, because they come from a different background. They come from a different part of the country. They have a different set of values. And so they just see things differently. And that's one of the great joys and fascinating things about research. When you start to engage with people, you realize people are much more diverse than you often think about on a day-to-day basis when you're sitting in your conference rooms. All right, last couple items. We'll round the bend here. They don't update it. Sometimes people say, 31% of our customers say they prefer to use, ATMs rather than their phone to do banking. That was a study we did in 1997. Well, that's probably no longer accurate, And particularly today, in the era of COVID, people's needs and expectations are changing faster than ever. What I'm telling clients is that, in most areas, any research done pre-COVID has to be looked at with great suspicion. If it hasn't been in some way revalidated post-COVID, because people's needs have changed so much. People's views and values have even shifted. So you have to be mindful of how old is what you're looking at. And the older research gets, the more risk there is that things have changed enough that it can no longer be relied on. And the last one might sound a little counterintuitive, which is they empathize too much. And what we mean by that is that when you're say interviewing somebody, I always say the 5 most dangerous words when you're interviewing somebody is, I know what you mean. Someone says, it's so stressful to go to the grocery store. And you say, I know exactly what you mean. And then you write that down, and your research report says that people are stressed when they go to the grocery store because the high prices are freaking them out because, they're not going to be able to afford the groceries. Well, is that why the person was stressed out? You empathize with them. Maybe you're stressed out by that when you go to the grocery store. And then so, if you're doing an interview, you empathize with somebody about the fact that they say they're stressed out, but you didn't ask them why they were stressed out. And then you realize, actually, no, what's stressing them out is the, fact that foods are made with pesticides, or the fact that it's so noisy in the store, or so brightly lit, or whatever it is that may stress somebody out when they go to the grocery store. These days, it's no doubt fear of getting infected. But so the point is, while empathy is a critical part, in the book we talk about design thinking, and one of the key components is how you empathize with your customers. But part of that empathy comes through data and really understanding the nuances of how they're thinking and feeling. But when you're collecting the data, you have to be careful not to empathize too much, especially if you're engaged in some kind of one-on-one research, such as an interview, because you can come to go kind of get in that mindset where you shorthanding. Yep, I know exactly what you mean, and you just could be wrong. You're reading between the lines, but is your reading between the lines accurate? And really, the answer to that is just follow-up questions. I never want to assume I know what someone means. And so if they use a term or they talk about something or a feeling they've had, one thing we talk a lot about in the book is the relationship between thoughts, feelings, and behavior. So, if someone says they're stressed out, I want to know what's stressing them out. In other words, it's a feeling. I'm sorry, in the book, let me restate that. We talk about experiences and how they relate to thoughts and feelings, and how thoughts and feelings lead to behaviors. So if someone starts about talking about a feeling, I always want to understand, well, what experiences are creating that feeling? Because that's usually what creates feelings, either a memory or an imagined experience, or experience that's occurring right now. And then furthermore, I want to understand, how did that lead to behavior? If someone's stressed out in the grocery store, well, what did that lead them to do? So anyway, in the book, I think it's actually one of the supplements to the book we offer on the website. We have a whole set of suggestions and tips about follow-up questions when you're dealing with someone in a research type mode, because you really, really want to make sure that, again, a big part of the kind of whole approach that we have to customer research is this model that says that we have this connection between customer behavior and business outcomes. And so we want to understand, what are the things that influence customer behavior? And thoughts and feelings influence behavior, and experiences are what influence thoughts and feelings. And that kind of causality, that little set of Newton balls, where one thing called experience hits the balls called thoughts and feelings, which hits the balls called behavior, which hit the ball called business results, if that makes sense. Understanding that causality is very often one of the most important things we can do in research. And then, of course, understanding it in detail, which means understanding things like, well, what about product assortment, or what about user interface of an app, or what about pricing, or there's many, many things, of course, that one can research. But to understand how the experience affects that sequence of things that leads to the business result. So the bottom line is, when someone says something that implies, I went to that restaurant and it was so bad that I'm never going to go there again. And you go, yep, I totally understand what you mean. Well, be careful, right? You may have the same opinion about that restaurant, but for totally different reasons. So again, drill into, what was your experience at the restaurant? And then what did it make you think? What did it make you feel? And then explain to me why those feelings are causing you to say that you'll never go there again, etc. So anyway, those are, I'll put it back up one more time here. Wait a minute, no, that's not how I do it. I do it like this. Oh, it's not working anymore. Oh, well, I won't put it back up. But those were the 8 things. You can always rewind, right? Those were the 8 things that I think, oh, thank you, Caitlin. The 8 reasons why I find customer research fails. People just don't share it. It sits in a binder in someone's office and people aren't aware of it. Or the researcher is researching basically the wrong things. They don't have the right research questions, and therefore they don't. Nobody cares about the research, or not that many people care, because it's actually not answering the questions that they need to know. Or the answer is just they don't appeal to them. Shoot the messenger, right? That's not the answer we wanted, and we need a culture change there so that people are realizing that facts are friendly, as they say, and news that something's not working is especially helpful early, not something that should be sort of brushed under the rug. And sometimes instead of ignoring it or disregarding it, they cherry pick it, exaggerate, overgeneralize it. In other words, you're not getting the value of the research if you're distorting it. Or they draw over conclusions from research because they like what they hear, or even it's not even they're trying to exaggerate, but they're just trying to get the maximum value from the research, but they take it too far. They use it for things that it's not really telling them. They're not precise enough about what do we really know. And so they're not either over quantifying, or they're assuming that things that a certain type of customer told them apply to all other types of customers, which might be true, but it might not be true. Or they let it get stale, they don't update it, and they assume that research done a few years ago is still valid. or these days, even research done a year ago is still valid. And lastly, they do the research in such a way that they allow themselves to jump to conclusions and therefore come to the wrong conclusion because they haven't been disciplined enough about asking follow-up questions to make sure they really understand what someone is saying. So those are the 8 things. I'm sure there are others. Feel free to put anything in the chat if there's something else that you think belongs on that list. We'd love to build the list up to 10 or 12 or whatever. If you think I've missed anything, I certainly could have. And appreciate any other questions or comments. I want to mention also that you can, of course, continue to pick up my book on Amazon. Alas, the sale that we've been talking about for a few weeks on Amazon is over. But you can, of course, still buy the ebook on Amazon. We were the 14th most sold book on all of Amazon last week. So really psyched about that, as well as the number 2 on the Wall Street Journal nonfiction bestsellers list. The hardcover copy of the book comes out in January, beginning of January, right after the new year. And we wanted that copyright 2021 date, right? You can pre-order it now for only $9.99 plus shipping and handling. So even after the shipping and handling, it's way cheaper than getting it from Amazon, even with Prime and all that. So, and the URL for that is here, wdc.ht/pre-order. So feel free to go to Amazon, pick up the ebook now, or go to the pre-order site where you can get the you can pre-order the hardcover book, and they come with tons of bonuses, which you can also learn about on that site. So thanks again for watching. Hopefully this was useful to you, and have an awesome day.